And let's share.
Yeah.
That's it.
Cool.
That's fine.
Excellent.
And don't forget to stop it at the end.
As if. Cheers, Martin. Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Mark Gatter. I'm one of the trainers at Academy Class, and I'm going to be probably talking interminably, let's face it, about blending modes in Photoshop. If any of you have any questions at all along the way, please do stop me, because otherwise I'm just going to talk straight for the next hour, okay? So, Photoshop is my favorite program of all of the Adobe suite, although I do like InDesign a lot, and heck, I quite enjoy Illustrator too, but I think Photoshop is absolutely the most fun you can have on a computer. I mean, I'm probably wrong, probably plenty of people disagree with me. But blending modes, if you haven't used them, are a very, very cool way of working with images to change them. You've probably all seen examples. Right now, if you go to the online Land's End catalog, and you want to buy a t-shirt, you go look for t-shirts, you'll see the same t-shirt, only this one's green, and this one's red, and this one's blue. But all the shadows, the lighting, and so on is perfect right the way through. And that's done using a blending mode. So that's kind of where I'm going to start. Now I'm going to probably drift a little and do other things as well. So this is mostly blending modes, but I'm going to throw a few other things in as well. Has anyone in here ever used calculations in Photoshop? Cool, you did. Congratulations. Very few people even know about it. Just to let you know, I'm going to be doing that a bit later, because calculations is a way of lifting a complex object out of its background. That's pretty much what it's used for. And it was there right from day one in Photoshop, before you even had layers, which came in a version 4. Not CS4, version 4. And back then, before you had layers, the only way you could really get your teeth into an image and work with it was by using channels. So calculations offsets the value of one channel against another to produce a new channel as a result. And the idea is to gradually finesse your way into a white image on a black background as a channel that then you can load as a selection and use to cut your object out of its frame and put it somewhere else. Layers, of course, meant that it was much easier to do in a different way. And calculations just sort of became this backwater that no one ever paddled up. And it's actually very, very useful. And it involves blending modes as well. Because when you offset one channel against another, you can use masks, you can use blending modes, you can do all kinds of cool stuff. So I'll get into that a little bit too. So if you haven't seen calculations before, it's involved. It's really quite involved sometimes, but the end result is amazing. And if you use it yourself, and don't forget, these sessions are being recorded, so you can download this and go through it yourself. Just find a picture that you've got of a difficult object. Like ideally, you know, a hairy object. I usually use a picture of one of my dogs because he's a really hairy object. And it's very difficult to lift him out of his background, but you can do it with this tool. Okay, so first thing I'm going to show you is, let's go back into Photoshop here. And let's go to the desktop, blending modes, and there's this image called bike. Red bike, yeah. I'll try. Okay, sorry. Yeah, the acoustics in these rooms are strange. Oh, okay. Well, just tell them to shut up. Okay? Thank you. That's cool. That may help. I think actually that's going to help a lot. Okay, but I'll still try and speak up. Okay, so here we've got a red bike. What color would you like to change it to? Green. Someone said green, someone said yellow. Who said yellow? Okay, anyone got a gun? You can't do yellow, and I'll tell you why later. I was kind of hoping someone would say yellow, and I was kind of hoping somebody wouldn't. But I'll tell you why later you can't do yellow. But let's do green first, okay? So the first thing I'm going to do is pick a green. Now it's much harder to call out a green using RGB, you may have noticed. For instance, how do you get yellow with RGB? Red and green, yeah, that's good. Not many people can think through that. If you've used Photoshop a lot, you know red and green produces yellow. But if you don't know, that's a little tricky. Incidentally, anyone here involved in outputting for print? Quite a few of you. Okay, so you know about the dangers of RGB, and you don't use RGB for print. I've got just hopefully a real, just quick example of why that's really spooky. So let's say here you've got this triangle, and this is a really crass example, but it's kind of true. You've got red, green, and blue. If you mix red and green together, as you just said, you get yellow. So yellow is kind of in the middle between red and green. If you mix red and blue together, do you know what you get? Magenta. If you mix red and blue paint together, there you get purple. But this isn't red and blue paint, this is light. If you mix red and green paint together, you're sure not going to get yellow. So RGB is light, glows in the dark. Hopefully you're printing one. If it does, move slowly away and pull it up. So red and blue together produces magenta. Fairly obviously, blue and green together produces cyan. Yeah, okay, so now we've figured out that the CMYK area fits like that within the RGB space. And that's why the CMYK is so limited. The other thing is that because red, green, and blue is made of light, the more of the colors you have, the brighter the result. So in the middle of the red, green, and blue, you've got white. Throw them all together, you've got white. Whereas with CMYK, we're mixing pigment. The more of it you use, the darker things get. In the middle of that one, you'd have not black. You'd have something close. But that's the bigger problem. That's why CMYK and RGB are not quite opposites, because you can't make black with CMY. You have to add K, which stands for key. That's why they call it key in print shots. They say, give me a new key plate. That's where we get the K in CMYK. That was a digression. Now we're going to mix a green. So I'm going to mix a CMYK green. Let's have a lot of blue. 100%. Well, heck, let's not. Let's just see what we get there. Okay, let's call it 80 blue, 80 cyan, 25 magenta. The kind of colors that an art director might come up with. 80, 25, 110. There's our green. I'm going to make a new layer. Totally new transparent layer, and to fill a new layer really quickly and easily with the foreground color, because that's foreground, that's background, is Alt Backspace. If you use Command or Control Backspace, it fills it with the background color. It's a very useful, quick shortcut. That either fills a whole layer or a selection. And then I'm going to apply a blending mode, which is an interaction between these two layers. And if I hit that with the blending mode of hue, I just got a green bike. Now I also got green road cones, green brake light. That's probably not a good idea. Green person. So ideally I would want to make a selection of the bike first. Now one thing that you may notice about this is that the background is very, very slightly tinted, but not very much. And that's because this blending mode, hue, only affects things that were a discernible color. And that's what hue means. If it's not a discernible color, if it's quite neutral, which in an RGB image, which this is, means that the amounts of red, green, and blue are pretty much equal. They're very similar. You get a neutral gray if you've got equal amounts of red, green, and blue. And at one end of the spectrum you have white, and at the other end you have black. Anywhere in between you have a neutral gray. If it's a neutral gray, it's not going to get colored by hue at all. Whereas if you use a blending mode of color, everything, whether it's neutral or not, gets colored. And some images, hue works better, and some images, color works better. So this is an image where I would say hue works better. Now I may want to make a selection first so that I don't have to do a lot of work with the eraser tool after the fact. So one of the things that I might do before I actually apply that layer is go into here and use Select Color Range. So I don't know if you're familiar with this area. If you're trying to pick particular colors through your image, it's a good idea to check that, localized color clusters, because that helps to restrict the selection to the areas that you actually work on. And you can choose whether to work on the selection over here or an image. I prefer to work on a selection. I'm going to put the fuzziness slider mid-40s, that's probably fine for now. And then I'm just going to click on the image. And there is the red that I clicked on and a few other reds in the image that are similar to it. Now, this is a click and drag tool, it's not just a click tool. But I am making a selection, so in order to increase the selection, I've got to hold down the Shift key. If I wanted to decrease the selection, I'd hold down the Alt key and then work on it, and that would remove areas. So if I drag across areas of this fuel tank, you see that that little image here is starting to wake up quite a lot. And it could be selecting the road cones, but it's not really doing a huge job of selecting the road cones because I've got localized color clusters on. Now the fuzziness slider will tend to increase or decrease that selection. The range slider kind of works with the fuzziness slider, and it can isolate just the areas that... See, look, the helmet now is out of the picture completely, pardon my pun, because I haven't clicked on it at all. Now if I decide to work on that as well, then my range slider picks that up really well, and it keeps it. So range and fuzziness tend to work together. Now I want this mudguard quite extensively, so I'm going to try zooming in here. Whoops. Can't do that just now. No, it's not going to help. So I'm going to just hold that down, and I should have zoomed in first. And you don't want to pick any colors that you don't want. That's probably pretty good. If I now click OK, I get a selection of those areas. I can now just get, say, the Freehand lasso tool, hold down the Alt key, click and drag around the areas that I didn't want, like his hand. And I've now pretty much got the areas that I want in here. There's a few more bits here that I actually want to snag, so I'm going to get those with the... I'm using someone else's laptop today, so I feel a little bit fingers and thumbs on it. That's not bad. I'll probably snag a little bit more there. Okay. Now, because I know that the areas around this are fairly neutral in general, I could afford to increase the area of that selection just a little bit. So if I go Select, I'm not going to bother with Refine Edge here. It's just not worth the trouble. Modify, Expand, and maybe tell it 2 pixels. That's plenty. And now on this image, I can isolate the areas. I've got right now selected the areas that I want. If I hit delete now, I'd lose them. So I'm going to inverse instead. That means now I've got the rest of the image, and hit backspace and Command D, and there I'm pretty much down to my green bike. Now the nice thing about these is they don't fight. So if I now wanted to produce a blue bike, all I have to do is pick a blue, make a new layer, Command-click on the thumbnail on layer 1, which loads the area that I want selected, move to layer 2, Alt-Backspace, and hit that with the blending mode of hue once again. And now I've got a red bike, a green bike, and a blue bike all in the same image. So that's pretty straightforward. Now to a yellow bike. Any idea why I can't do yellow? Okay, it's a little bit strange, but imagine that shade of red turned into a grayscale. It's quite dark. Then imagine yellow turned into a grayscale. It's quite light. And that's why it doesn't work. You're working with the relative grayscale values of the colors when you do this. So unless I pick something that ends up being a similar shade of gray, it doesn't have to be exactly the same, but similar to the color that I'm trying to cover up, the strength of the color I'm trying to cover up wins, and it would sort of produce multiple layers of yellow. That would be the effect, and the result would be brown. If I wanted to turn this bike yellow, I would have to make a selection of the areas that I wanted to grab hold of, copy them to another layer, and work on them to lighten them enough so that when I used the blending mode, it actually worked as yellow. And to lighten those, I might use, I would probably use curves rather than levels, because curves you've got sort of white in one corner, black in the other corner. You can grab the white corner and drag it, and as you do so, everything gets darker. You can drag the dark corner, and everything gets lighter. So you can, it's a nice sort of flat adjustment to do that. So that's hue. That's a really useful one. Now I'll show you a useful way of using color as a blending mode. There's a lot of blending modes, but only some of them are really, really useful often. And a lot of them are quite esoteric and you don't really want them very often. There are some that I've never used professionally because I do a lot of freelance stuff, so I like to keep my hand in and keep it sharp, if that makes sense. Yes? Yeah, sure. So I've got a selection here, and now if I go select, modify, are you familiar with the Refine Edge window? So the Refine Edge window is comparatively new, and it expanded on the tools that you have here under Modify, where you've got border, smooth, feather, expand, contract, things like that. And to use these, you have to just enter a pixel count. So you've kind of got to know what you're doing. You're not going to get a visual representation of what you're doing, which tells you what that amount of feather is going to look like, for example. So if you know that you only want 1 or 2 pixels, which is often what you need for contract and expand, it's a great tool. And then you just enter the amount and click OK. One of the particular uses of that, incidentally, is if you're making a selection with, say, the magic wand. Actually, I can do better than tell you about it. I can show you about it. And it's kind of involved with the next image. So anyway, I'm done with this one. So I'm going to close it and go to the next image. Now this is one that I use in the Photoshop classes at Academy class. We start with this image. And we use variations to fix the color. Do you know about variations? No? Okay, let's go back one more step and I'll show you how variations works. This is a real picture that was sent to me by one of my clients who was in a state of panic. He's a property developer and he bought a stately home called Water Castle in Wiltshire a few years ago when nobody wanted it because it was basically falling into ruin. And he maxed out his credit card and his father's credit card to buy it. And he had enough left to fix up one apartment, sold it, and had enough to do 2 more, sold them, and so on. And gradually worked his way through the whole building. And he did a really good job. He's very ethically minded, except that he's got a stately home. So this room was the after. This was the after picture, and the before picture showed it as it was when he bought it, which was a ruin. There's holes in the ceiling, there's no windows, half the floor is missing. And he had a meeting that afternoon for a multi-million-pound property development project, and he's giving a presentation, and this is one of the stars of his presentation. So he called me saying, help. So when you get an image, something like this, the first thing is decide what's wrong with it. What's wrong with this image? Someone said washed out. What else is wrong with it? Low contrast. What else is wrong with it? Sorry? How about it's too green? Yeah? Now, it may be washed out, it may be low contrast. If we can't fix it being too green, forget it, you know, there's nothing to do. You might as well go on to the next thing. So you've got to knock down the big one first, which means you've got to get into the habit of identifying the main problem and dealing with it first, or else you might as well not bother. So that's what I tried to do is, okay, it's too green. If you haven't used variations, this is truly amazing. Image, I don't have it on here because it's, wow. Oh yeah, I do, sorry, variations, there we are. If you run Photoshop in 64-bit mode, it's not there. Okay, if you run it in 32-bit mode, it is there. So if you've heard, oh, 64-bit's great, it's much faster, well, I've never really noticed it, to be honest. But things like variations and lighting effects, which is a very cool filter, are not there in 64-bit mode, so I tend to use 32. Here's the variations window. You've got original. Well, I'll show you what I did, and then I'll just show you how I did it. So first of all, looking at this, okay, nothing much there. I'll saturate this up a bit. That looks good. Turn that down again, because that's really what you have to do. Now blue looks good as well. This is what I'm aiming for. Make it a couple of hits darker, and that looks about right. Done. I waited several hours before I emailed it to him. Because, you know, if I'd emailed it to him straight away, he'd say, what, this bill? You know? Well, that bill wasn't just for 5 minutes work. It's for 5 minutes plus 20 years, you know. So I built him something a little more appropriate. Now I'll show you what I did. I won't tell you what I built. Okay, so back in variations, now you can see it's already, it's remembered what I did. So you have to level it out again. This is a good trick. Every time you use variations, click on original, levels it. Now you're back to square one. Here you've got color variations, red, green, blue, cyan, magenta, yellow. Over here you've got black. You can add it or take it away. In the middle of all those, you've got current pick, and it's up here as well next to your original picture. If you can't see a variation that's going the way you want, you have a slider up at the top going towards coarse or fine, which emphasizes or lessens the degree of color variations. So at that point, I couldn't really see which way to go, but if I turn the slider up one, suddenly magenta looks good. But the key to that is, if you turn the slider up and make a choice, then you turn it back down, or everything looks too strong. So now I've got to turn the slider back down, at which point blue looks pretty good, so I gave it a hit of blue, which cooled it down a bit. And I only ever use this for making things darker. Never use this window for making things lighter. If you want to make things lighter, go back out, use levels, curves. Don't use variations. A couple of hits are darker. There we go. So that's the idea. So what I start with is, here's this room, fix it with variations. It's tricky. I won't bother, but you can do it. But the result is something like that. But the problem is you've got this blue shadow in the fireplace and the blue shadow under the chair. Well, it is blue. You can't really tell from that, but it's quite blue. And the rest of the room's quite warm. And the blue doesn't really fit with the rest of the floor. Now at this point, what I'm going to show you is how I redecorate my house. If any of you ever redecorate a room and you're going to paint a wall, take a photo of it. Bring it into Photoshop. Make a selection of that area, and then use blending modes to figure out what color you want to make it. So I'll show you this process. The idea here is now I would have to make a selection of the floor, Now I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but I might try with a magic wand tool. I've got a selection of 32. Let's turn that down to 15 and then start making selections. Okay, you see this speckling here? Little pixels that aren't selected? Yeah? Here we go. Loads of them. The stars at night. Now if you end up with something like that and you want to simplify it, this is a really good use of select, modify, expand. I'll expand it by 4 pixels. Okay. Now I'll contract it by 4 pixels. Which means I just went exactly back to what I had before, but all my speckles have now been eaten and absorbed. And I've got a lot less work to do with the magic wand tool. Good tip, huh? Okay, so then you go through and make the selection. Well, I've already got it. In channels, oh man, I didn't have it. I thought I had it. This isn't the PSD. Okay. In that case, I've just got to make a quick selection. So bear with me a second, folks. This chat amongst yourselves. Let's just turn that tolerance up. I'll turn it back up to 30. So I'm not going to do the whole floor, because otherwise we'll be here all day, and I've got lots of other stuff to do. So I love the magic wand tool. I think it's an excellent tool. But of course, there's some areas here that I'm not going to dare to do with the magic wand tool, because if I do, I'm going to basically eat the chair, and I don't really want to eat the chair. Oops, like that. So you have to keep watching and make sure that you don't select the things that you don't want to select. The nice thing about this blending mode is if an area is black, you can't change its color with a blending mode. It's going to stay black. That's why black overprints in printing. None of the other colors do, because they're transparent, and you're trying to create a blend, a mix. When a cyan dot lands on a yellow dot, you want to see a green dot. When a black dot lands on a yellow dot, you're going to see a black dot. If it lands on a magenta dot, you're going to see a black dot. So they don't bother. Black overprints. Let's say I've got my selection here, and I'm just going to quickly save that so I don't have to worry about it again. Okay, then in the Layers window, I'm going to make a new layer, and I'm going to choose a color. Now, if I wanted to choose a color from the existing floor, I drop a tool, click on the floor, and I just got my new color as the foreground color. So I'll start with that, and Alt Backspace, as usual, fills that selection with that color. Isn't that lovely? Now I'm going to use a blending mode of color. And there's the floor. All one color. And this is how you paint your room in Photoshop before you get to grips with a paintbrush. It's much less messy and less expensive. You don't have to buy 20 pots of paint to find the right one. And if you look at the result and you think, well, actually, that floor really should be purple, then you can just open up Hue and Saturation on that layer and drag the hue slider around, and saturation if you want, until you find purple. There we go. Sorted. So that's the use of color as a blending mode instead of hue. Sometimes one works best, sometimes another one works best. Boy, that's shocking. Incidentally, you may notice in the Layers window here, this layer only shows me the area of the image. It doesn't show me the full image. Generally, I prefer to see the full image. Now, that's an options thing. If I click on Options and go to Panel Options, Layer Bounds is what I've got now. If I choose Entire Document and click OK, now I've got the entire thumbnail of the whole document showing in the layer. I just prefer it like that myself. So that's using a layer blend of color. Okay, we're done with that one. These are the biggies. Now, how about if you've left an image out in the sun? Or you've been given an image and it's faded and you want to somehow bring that back up again. So I'm going to fade this, and I mentioned the curves window earlier. So if I wanted to fade this, if I grab that black corner there, now these are all 10% divisions. And if I drag that down just to there, that image is now 90% strength. If I drag it down to here, 20% strength. Any of you ever want to run type over an image? So you take the image into InDesign maybe, or wherever, and you want to put type over the top. That is where I normally run an image to if I want to put type over it. 20%. That's actually pretty strong. You know, if a bland area like a sky, well, you can get away with more. But if it's a busy area, you have to hold it back to about 20%. If you don't, even though that type is legible, no one's going to read it. People just won't. If you make it very, very slightly difficult for people to do, they're just not going to do it. So you've got to make it absolutely easy, and then they'll do it. So, yeah.
Say using levels or just using saturation.
Ah. The nice thing about curves is that you don't lose any data. If you use brightness and contrast to do this, for one thing, it wouldn't, well, you could lower the contrast a whole lot and then increase the brightness. But there's a danger with that tool. It's less now because Adobe realized that they've got a problem tool in brightness and contrast. And it's kind of unfortunate because if you've got an image that lacks contrast, that, and you click on your image adjustments, oh look, brightness and contrast, you think, great, that's the tool for the job. But in fact, it's downright dangerous because adjusting the brightness can very often burn out the top highlights in your image to white. And once you've done it, you never get them back. Now this method, even though I've brightened the whole image now, really, I haven't burned anything out at all. And as a result, I can get it back. Whereas if I'd burned it out to nothing, I wouldn't be able to get it back. There's nothing I could do. So Adobe recognized this when they made CS4. They put a lot of R&D into improving brightness and contrast and make it much less damaging than it was in CS3. Old habits die hard. I still don't use it, but it is better than it was. And for something like this, curves is just an easier place to do it. Levels is a bit trickier to do. Levels is great for adjusting the tone range of an image. It's not so good for doing, you know, flattening it to nothing like this. So, oops, I just cancelled it. Why did I do that? There we go, 20%. So here's the image that has been left out in the sun. Now we want to bring it back up to all its former glory. And that uses a blending mode called multiply. So here in the layers window, it's looking a bit sad. Quickest way to make a copy of a layer, absolutely the quickest way, is Command J. There are many ways of doing a lot of things in Photoshop. There's usually 5 ways of doing everything. The fastest way to make a copy of a layer or a selection is Command J. Unless you're on a PC, in which case it's Control J. This layer, I'm going to give it the blending mode of multiply. That multiplied up the saturation of the colors. And because I've given this blending mode to that layer, I can just go Command J, 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 J. And I'm back. My image is back almost. Not quite perfect. It's a little bit different. I might have to do a little tweaking with curves to just adjust the contrast a little bit. But basically, I've got the tone in my image back. So that's another incredibly useful blending mode. I just noticed the time. Eek! So I'm going to start going a little bit faster here, I think. Okay. Okay, so just while we're on the subject of multiply, I had to help a publisher out a while ago. They're doing a book on Ferrari, coffee table kind of book. Nice, you know, really nice cars, really nice cars. And Ferrari red just about lands in CMYK. It's amazing. You don't think you can hold that red in CMYK. You just about can. Some of it goes a little bit flat, but generally it'll work. But what happened was this. When they converted an image from RGB to CMYK, the color leached out of the shadows. And That I've noticed before, but this was happening to all these images. And these pictures are just dying on the screen. So it's a strange thing. As you made that conversion, this particular thing was happening. And if they'd printed it, of course, that would have been the result in print. As black and gray took over, the color disappeared. So the thing to do was to figure out what exactly that color was, which is just simply click on it with the eyedropper tool, and there it is. And then fill a new layer with it, and give it a blending mode of multiply. And that puts the color right back through all the shadows. And it worked perfectly on every single image. We had to use select color range in order to generate a selection of the areas that we wanted to affect. And then this blending mode just fixed the whole thing. And within a couple of hours, we had every single picture in the whole book fixed, which was very gratifying indeed. Not just for them, but for me, because I got to invoice them for it. It's brilliant. So that's multiply. Now here's a slightly different one. This is not one of my sheep. I do have sheep. Half my time spent down here in London doing high-tech stuff. The other half of my life I live in Wales. I have a small holding in Wales. I have 11 sheep, 4 chickens, 2 dogs, 1 wife. Not necessarily in that order. All the animals are rescue animals. We grow all our own food. It's kind of fun. So that end of my life is totally low-tech. And because I miss the family when I'm down here in London, most of my courses involve something to do with sheep or chickens or dogs. Not usually my wife. I leave her out of the course. I talk to her in the evenings. So anyway, this is not one of my sheep. And this is a picture where the sky has kind of burned out. Now you can put a sky back in Photoshop using a blending mode. First of all, you have to actually create the sky. Now, if you want to just do a blue sky, you pick 2 shades of blue and a gradient. But what about if you want to do a sky that's got clouds in it as well? So let's do that. Now if I open up the image size window, that tells me what I've got here. And let's say the image's largest dimension is 15 centimeters and the resolution is 150. Rule of thumb is you double it if you're going to create a sky. You just double that size. So I'm going to go 30 centimeters at 150. And now I've got to pick my colors as well. So first of all, I'll pick a shade of blue. And I'll try and be reasonable. I don't live on the top of the Himalayan peak, so I'm not going to pick a dark purple. So let's say, okay, and I've got blue and white. New image, 30 centimeters by 30. I can't think in terms of pixels per centimeter, because it's not an industry standard terminology. So there's the image I want. Now I don't want to just fill it with a gradient, I want to fill it with clouds. So, filter, render, clouds. It's like you're lying back on the grass staring straight up on a kind of a hazy day. That won't work quite like that, will it? No. So I'll bring this into this image using the Move tool. You just click and drag. There it is. That's all you have to do. I don't actually need this anymore, so I'll close it. But in this one, of course, it's much, much bigger than the original image, so I can't see a thing. So I'm going to zoom way out. You see how the window is getting smaller? And sometimes it won't. And that's a preferences thing. And right now, I don't want it to get smaller, so I'm going to change that. So on a Mac, the preferences are under the Photoshop menu. And the one that I want, I think, is General. Zoom resizes windows. I'm just going to uncheck that. A couple of other things that you may have done while you're in here is cursors. Choose precise over here, and then the cursor. The cursor doesn't look like the tool. I mean, usually we know what tool we're using. We don't need the cursor to look like that as well. Another thing that you might want to change in interface is uncheck those 2 boxes. Otherwise, Photoshop behaves like InDesign, in that every document you've got open fills the working area. And if you have 2 or 3 documents open, there are tabs along the top. You can click on the tab and go to that document. But I don't want Photoshop to behave like that, because it means I can only see 1 image at a time, and it makes it really difficult to work with 2 images like I just did. So I unchecked those 2. I did that earlier. So here's my sky. If I do Command T, that shows me the full extent of it, and you just want to put it more or less in the middle, and then grab a handle at the bottom and pull up a bit, looking at this. So now it's creating more this sort of side-to-side linear thing, but there's no perspective in it. There's no forwards and backwards and closer and further away. So I've got to switch to another transform tool while I'm here, which is under Edit, that's where they all are, Perspective. And the Perspective transform tool allows you to grab one corner and pull in, and another corner and pull out. And now I've got perspective in my sky. So now if I apply that, and then go back up to a full image view, well, the sky's got potential, but I can't see the sheep anymore. So this is where the blending mode comes in, and I'm going to add a blending mode of darken to that sky. And there it is. Fits right in. Now if I had a very busy skyline made up of trees and branches, to make a selection of the spaces in between all those branches would be just forget it. But you can drop a sky in to all those spaces using a blending mode of darken. So what did it do? Well, what it did was say any pixel on this new layer that is darker than the pixel beneath it, it wins, and it replaces what's beneath it. Whereas if the pixel on the layer beneath is darker than the incoming stuff, it's not replaced. So the mountains stay there, but all the sky gets replaced.
5 minutes.
Cheers, Mark. Now, if I wanted to make this more realistic, I would actually want to add another layer here and a blending mode, a gradient of white to transparent, because skies get lighter down towards the horizon. And on this layer alone, I'm just going to go click, drag, and I'm holding down the Shift key, which keeps that straight. I think I need to go a little bit further. Hold on. I've got totally the wrong brush selected. So I'm just going to bin that one and do another. Always check the brush before you draw a gradient, because otherwise you have to look like an idiot in front of a lot of people. Okay. Now it's not affecting this layer, of course, because there's a blending mode on that. But well, you can see what it did to the sheep. It's kind of wrecked it. So I'm going to slide that down a little bit. Okay, now there we go. You can just see the mountains peering up over the top. If I merge this layer down into this one, the blending mode that's attached to that will affect both of them. And the quick way to merge them down should have been Command E, but that appears to have made it totally opaque. Oh, it's to apply the blending mode again, darken. Now that's very strange. That just did not work. Let's try that again. White to transparent. There's something funny going on here and it shouldn't be. That's not how it should look. That's more how it should look. Okay, I'll blend that one down. Got it. Keep on trying and you'll get there. So there's my sky getting lighter down towards the horizon. The only strange thing about that, of course, is you don't see skies like that in Scotland, so you'd actually have to desaturate it completely like that. Then you got a nice stormy rain. And maybe even make it a bit darker. So there we go. Cool. Then you'd have to change the color of the lake as well. Okay. I'm not even sure if it's practical for me to show you this calculation things. Now, you guys are around all day. I'm doing two other things. Content-aware tools at 2:30 is probably, I could probably squeeze calculations into that if I manage my time a little better. So I'm sorry, I don't think I'm going to be able to do it on this one, but if you want to come back at 2:30 in here, then I'll show you how calculations work. So there you go. Anyway, that's a few blending modes. Thank you very much.
Sorry, can you manage the old run? Do you process all of them?
I do most of them, yeah.
Right, okay. Next year, I want to actually do, well, basically be creative.
Creative Suite.
Yes, but I actually want to add in a Photoshop one, just to actually get the accreditation. I was just wondering if later I've got kind of like a portfolio, could we maybe like go through everything that I would need to take just to see whether I can actually slim the Creative Suite down and pay less.
Oh, give it a try, sure.
Yeah, just because I mean I've used it, or I've been using Photoshop for over 10 years, so I just don't know how much is just going to be going over old ground. But I know there's loads that I don't know.
There's always with Photoshop, yeah.
Sure.
Always.
Is there a better time that I can see that I can see you?
Let me just see. Let me just see. I want to sit in on this guy's course.
Yeah.
Maybe over lunch.
Yeah, okay, I have to see Martin as well, but like if I can
Sure.
come find you.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll be around. You're welcome.
Sorry.
Why? That's odd. Yeah, I wondered why Mark stuck his head in and said
Yeah, I'm
5
not
more
sure if the other
minutes.
sessions are finished or not. I'm not sure I have finished yet, just in case you haven't
Yeah, that
checked.
is strange. I think generally, I would say whenever there's a timing problem and Mark's been involved, I kind of know where to point the finger. So I would say it's probably Mark's mistake, and I could have covered calculations. That's
Well,
right.
yeah, you may even want to carry on with this if it's time. I don't know.
Can I help you?
I was a quick question there, but I was thinking, what are you going to cover in super tips and tricks?
Okay, vanishing points. Let me just check because I can't even think straight at the moment. Okay, so vanishing point, refine edge window. That is amazing. That's a really good one. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Retouching photos of faces with wrinkles and things like that.
Oh, yes.
Making animated GIFs.
Okay.
And there's another one using blending mode, not blending mode, using the hue and saturation window to remove not just red eyes, but red faces. If you've got a portrait shot and someone in the middle's got a really red face, you can tone it down and improve the color, so you don't have to reshoot. Hi.
Get the link to get that recorded later on.
They'll be. I'm not the one who asked, but
right.
in the office
I'll
they'll be able to.
Yeah.
Sure, that'll be
Sure,
fine.
thank you.
Hi.
I know you want to break for a bit. You know,
Yes.
I don't know if you're the kind of answer, but Photoshop extended version is something that I could use to render the face to make it 3D.
Yeah. To make it look 3D, but without using 3D package. Yes, you can. Do you have Illustrator as well? Can you come back to the that because on that, one of the things that I do is use this Illustrator to create a 3D box that I then bring into Photoshop and wrap it on it.
I've seen you do that. Me too.
Yeah, it's the same way. You see. That's what I do. Well, that's one way.
But what if it's slightly more complicated than box?
Still can. You've got a lot of tools that you can use to sort of distort.
Yeah. Because the company that I work for, they went and bought me the extended edition. But they're asking me to, for example, let's say, So for that to look like it's standing up and then it's 3D, when it's not photographed, with all the light and...
Yeah, no, for that you really want something that's got a bit more rendering ability. Probably Photoshop is not what you need to do that.
Ooh, it does rendering now, so got them to get the little up.
It's not quite that kind of rendering. Yeah. That one, that kind of thing, that's really difficult. You're really asking about. Osgood is the one to talk to about that. So he's doing. That's weird. Yeah. So he's going to do one next. He's the guy I'm doing two. He's really good. Yeah, and he uses 3D packages a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah.